Okay, welcome to this morning's meeting. I have no one with me in the room today other than committee clerks. But on Starleaf we have Ciara Ferguson, Andy Allen, Paul Frew, Anya Murphy and Mark Durkin. So all very welcome today. Just remind members, if you have any declaration of interest, you're required to declare them for today's session. I'll then move on to agenda item 1, apologies. So we have one apology from Aisling. Excuse me, we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is chairperson's business. Members, I have a number of pieces of business this morning. On Monday, on behalf of the committee, I chaired a number of sessions at the Policy Forum for Northern Ireland Seminar, Next Steps for Housing Policy in Northern Ireland. The seminar covered strategy and reform, tackling homelessness and priorities for housing supply, quality and sustainability. It was a really good session that covered all of those issues, some very interesting pieces, especially around the quality and sustainability piece, which will be very much looking forward for the next mandate, just how we make our homes more sustainable. So really good, and I know Gráinne Long was one of the contributors in that as well on Monday, and I know she's in with us next week, so we'll be hearing more about the Housing Executive and what they're doing next week. So good policy forum, and I was happy and more than happy to do it on behalf of the committee. Members, then you've been provided with a draft press release on the gambling bill in your table papers. Can I ask if members any comments? Are they content for the press release to be issued? Content? I don't see anybody. Oh, they're all in. They're all back in now, so just to remind you, we can hear you. Okay, thank you. Then, members, also in your table papers is a draft response to the Committee for Finance on the draft budget 2022-25. Can I ask members, have you any comments, or are you content to forward the response to the Committee of Finance? Content? Will somebody tell me? Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you.
Content.
Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 3, which is draft minutes. You'll find the draft minutes of the 3rd of February 22 at page 6 of your meeting pack. Can I ask members, are you content to agree the minutes as drafted?
Content.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 then is matters arising. Members, you've been provided at page 16 with a departmental response in relation to a committee briefing request on the housing budget. The draft 2022-25 budget is currently out for consultation. Officials have therefore suggested that the point at which it may be more helpful for the committee to receive a briefing will be once this process has concluded. Again, members, any comments? Are you content then to arrange a briefing once the consultation has ended? I know, as I say, next week we've got the Housing Executive coming in, and I know they have major issues with the draft budget. On how they're going to proceed with new bills, etc., and the homelessness as well. It's going to cause them major problems. So are you content that we get that briefing when the consultation is ended?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Members, you've been provided then at page 17 with a response from the Housing Executive in relation to the transfer of low income rates relief for owner-occupiers. The response states that this transfer has been worked on by both the Housing Executive and LPS staff in partnership for over 2 years, and all of the key issues have been addressed in tandem with the progression of the legislation. The Housing Executive is fully prepared in all respects for the transfer, and no additional resources are required. Again, members, any comments or content to note?
Content to note.
Content, thank you very much, Ciara. Okay, then I'll ask you then to turn to page 18, where you'll see a response from Retail NI in relation to crane grab machines in retail outlets. Retail NI can say with reasonable certainty that very few, if any, Retail NI members would have such machines. Likewise, the Chief Executive has never come across any when he's been doing his store visits. So can I then ask again, members, have you any comments? Or are you content to note that? Content to note?
Content to note. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, then we're going to move into agenda item 5 then, which is the draft committee report on the support for mortgage interest, etc. security for loans bill. Members, a copy of the draft report is in your tabled papers. We now need to consider our draft report on the support for mortgage interest, etc. security loans bill. We are focusing on the text of the report only, as the team will address any formatting issues once the text is agreed. I will ask for comments and then agreement on each section of the report, and so I'll start then with powers of membership. Can I ask if members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content?
Thank you. I'll move on then to executive summary. Can I ask if members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted? Content?
Content, yeah.
Okay. Moving on then to introduction. Can I ask, have members any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted? Are we content, members?
Yeah, content.
Thank you. Committee consideration of the bill. Can I ask members, have they any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content.
Content, thank
Content.
you. Then I'll move on to committee deliberations on the bill. Can I ask if members any comments on this, or are they content with this section as drafted? Members?
Content, yeah.
Content.
Thank you. Move on then to clause by clause consideration of the bill. Can I ask if members any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content.
Thank you.
Content, yeah.
Moving on then to appendices. Can I ask members, have you any comments? Are you content with this section as drafted?
Content, yeah.
Thank you. Then I'll move on to minutes. Can I ask them, members, are you content that the minutes from today's meeting are included in the report?
Yeah, content.
Okay. Then can I ask if members are content to agree that the report is final, pending the tidying up of formatting issues and any minor spelling or grammar noticed at the formatting check, and once those are done, that it is then printed?
Content.
Thank you. Okay, members, that concludes committee stage of the support for mortgage interest, etc. security of loans for loans bill. I'd like to thank all of you for your in-depth scrutiny of the bill, and would like to put on record our thanks to all of those that made submissions and gave oral evidence. I'd also like to thank the departmental officials and our Assembly bill officials for their hard work and help in working our way through the bill, and look forward to that coming then into the chamber for further debate. Okay, thank you, members. We're going to then move on. I assume, do we have those people in the audience yet? No, we're way ahead of ourselves today again. So we're going to then move on to, where we'll go to? We'll go to agenda item 8.
Yes.
Members, if I could ask you then to turn to agenda item 8, which is SR 2022-26, the Charities Act 2008, Presbyterian Widows Fund Association Scheme Order, Northern Ireland 2022. You'll find this at page 23 of your pack. Members, the clerk has been advised that this SR will be included in the next issued report of the Examiner's Statutory Rules, and they will not be drawn to the special attention of the Assembly. Members, can I ask therefore, have you any objections to this rule? No objections?
No.
Okay. Then I'll put the following, that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2022-26, the Charities Act 2008, Presbyterian Widows Fund Association Scheme Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and has no objection to the rule. I'll move on then to agenda item 9, which is SR 2022-27, the housing-related functions of the Department of Finance, exercised by the Housing Executive Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022. You'll find this at page 33. Can I ask if members have any objections to this rule? No objections?
No.
Okay, then I'll put the following. The Committee for Communities has considered SR 2022-27, the housing-related functions of the Department of Finance, exercised by the Housing Executive, Regulations Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the rule. Can we move on then to agenda item 10, which is SR 2022-28, the Energy Payment Support Scheme Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022. You'll find this at page 41. Can I ask members, have you any objections to this rule?
Chair.
Go ahead, Andy. Sorry, had his hand up. Andy, was up.
Chair, no objections to the rule being made, but can we seek an update from the department in respect of the unemployability supplement of war pension that I raised during the briefing session, and also the tax credits issue that we raised with them as to where that stands? If they are able to do anything in those, in the absence of an executive, can that be taken forward?
Okay, we can ask that, certainly. Paul, you wanted to come in? No?
Sorry, it might have been me, Chair.
Go ahead, Mark, sorry.
Make my camera off. Yeah, well, I was going to touch on some of the points that Andy has raised there. This seems, and we've been waiting for a wee while, but none of the points that we've raised have been taken into consideration in the drafting of it. We also have across departments an underspend, a surplus of cash currently, which I thought might give afforded some flexibility to expand the criteria around this scheme. Now, I don't know, again, then in the absence of an executive, the executive, my reading of this, have given the go-ahead to the Communities Minister to run a scheme. I don't know how sort of strict they are on the criteria of that scheme. But I just don't know, is there not scope to do more? I think all of the members of committee have raised, I suppose, the plight of the working poor, or those maybe just above the threshold, or who aren't in receipt of qualifying benefits. And whenever there is, or appears to be money that isn't being spent anywhere else and needs spent this year, it's just a crying shame that we can't use this scheme to get them the help that they badly need.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. I think every member of this committee has raised concerns around this. And Janice has just reminded me that when the officials were here, they had said that this issue could be looked at separately, like the other issues that we had before around these payments. So
my concern there, Chair, would be in the absence of an executive to approve a new scheme, we're in big trouble. We're not in as big a trouble as the people who need the help. Whereas if the green light's been given to a scheme, that's how I don't know how strict they are or how across the detail of the scheme that the First and Deputy First Minister gave the go-ahead for, that this could be or might be the only vehicle to do that on.
Okay, well then we need to ask those questions. We need to ask those of the Minister then as well. What flexibility does she have in extending this scheme or broadening this scheme out? So we'll ask those questions. I think that follows on from what Andy was saying anyway. Are members though content that we go ahead and make the rule? I don't think we have much of an option there but to make the rule and then continue to ask those further questions. Yes?
Chair, can I come in there?
Yes, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just to back up what Andy and Mark has said, this goes back to the questions that I raised last week with the Chancellor of the Exchequer's statement in the House with regards to the rates holiday they're getting over in England and how that plays out in Barnett consequentials, the 150 million of extra money that came to Northern Ireland also, whether that was linked, I think it was. So how then do we have the ability for the Department of Finance or the Minister of Finance to actually get that money down and use it in a similar guise? Because I think that may be the only way that we can assist those people who are just about managing and who aren't in receipt of any of those benefits that qualify them for the other schemes.
Okay, we have little choice but to move this statutory rule, or there be no scheme at all. So I think we're in agreement that we further ask those questions, and we keep asking those questions, But can I then have the committee's agreement that there are no objections to the rule?
Agreed.
No, well, the rule needs made
Yes.
clearly.
Okay, well then I'll go ahead.
If we miss
Yeah.
the
No, well,
boat,
look, we've said that we're going to ask those questions. Are members content that we then proceed along that route of asking the department and the minister how much further this can be widened out? And are there any implications? I think we've come to an agreement on that, certainly. So are members happy then that I put the question then? Right, thank you. That the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2022-28, the Energy Payment Support Scheme Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the report of the Examiner for Statutory Rules, has no objection to the rule. Okay, members, I think then we can move back. We have our witness there, so we move them back to, let me see, agenda item 6 we're going back to. So that is a briefing by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Members, you'll find a copy of the briefing paper in your tabled papers. And then can I welcome Dr. Paul Mullen to the meeting. Paul, would you please begin your briefing?
Thank you very much indeed. Real pleasure to be asked to address you today. I'm the Director of the National Lottery Heritage Fund in Northern Ireland. I've been in this post for the last 15 years, and that has enabled me to see about £150 million worth of lottery investment right across Northern Ireland. 150 out of total £250,000 that we've been able to deliver over the time of the lottery's existence. We, as an organisation, our function is about investing in heritage. And for that, we invest in the heritage that can best address communities and people's understanding of what's important to them about the past. And that has meant that we have been able to invest in every constituency throughout Northern Ireland, in museums, communities, landscapes. Our brief goes beyond just built heritage and museums into landscapes and natural heritage as well. So we've been able to invest and deploy our funds across a wide range of projects, from the Giant's Causeway through to the Mourne Mountains, Brook Park up in Derry, the workhouse in Enniskillen, and probably some of the projects that we're most proud of are actually projects where communities themselves get the opportunity to look at their own past. I'm thinking particularly there one particular project down in Fermanagh in relation to in Arnie Village, which has over a series of projects over the last 6 or 7 years won numerous archaeological awards and pulled the whole community of that area together in an interrogation of their own history and their own past. But we see that throughout all the environments that we engage in, and some of the major projects that we have ongoing at the moment, for example, in Belfast would be the likes of the city cemetery, where we're looking to help work with the council to really show the benefits of a cemetery which tells the whole story of Northern Ireland from the 19th century onwards, through the graves of the people that have lived there. Other projects have been the likes of HMS Caroline, and we're very hopeful that a very positive solution to it will be able to be announced in the not too distant future. And we believe we've touched all aspects of Northern Ireland. And probably the thing to point out in terms of the last couple of years through this COVID period has been how we've been able to work with the Department for Communities. The department have been working with us along with a number of other organisations to deliver COVID relief money. And we've been delivering a number of programs there. Initially, the sum was just under 6 million, about 5.7 million in the first period, and currently we're also delivering about £3.3 million worth of funding towards individuals, organisations, and to create some new heritage jobs. That's ongoing at the moment. So that particular work will have been awards will have been made by the end of this financial year. We've also in the last year or so worked closely with the likes of the Northern Ireland office in relation to the Shared History Fund, which was one of the obligations of the British government through the New Decade, New Approach. And there we were able to deliver a scheme of investing £1 million in relation to the centenary in a very inclusive way that drew in lots of the new communities to Northern Ireland as well as the more traditional ones. And I think that exemplifies the way that we operate all of our work. We're about the plurality of Northern Ireland, and we believe very strongly that a better understanding of our past creates a real opportunity for the future. That probably leads me to my final point, which would be we've been heavily involved over the last 10 years in the Decade of Centenaries, working very closely with the Community Relations Council. And that work, I think, has brought us through a series of potentially very challenging centenary years and commemoration events. And what has been delivered through many of the projects that we've been involved in has brought a much broader understanding of our past, a more plural understanding of our past, and particularly through our principles for remembering, we've seen how Belfast City Council has been able to sort of reimagine City Hall, utilising the principle as their sort of a core thought. And so that's probably about as much as I would like to say at the moment. We work very closely with the Department for Communities and have a great relationship with them and want to continue to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for briefing us and for your paper that you'd also sent through. You'd highlighted that for very good reason you had to suspend some of your usual programmes during that COVID period to provide emergency funding to organisations working in heritage. Are you able to tell us how successful that was in that funding? And then also around the Recovery, Employment and Skills Initiative for Heritage Fund on behalf of DFC. Do you feel that this will be the last of your emergency work, or will you then be in a position to start to move back towards your usual business and planned goals or planned projects?
Okay, in terms of the first question, as an organisation, we realised this was before there was any COVID relief money from any government department anywhere. And I should say this, we obviously work on a UK-wide basis, so we were deploying money on a UK-wide basis, but in the Northern Ireland context, my team was able to lead on our efforts here. And that money was absolutely vital at the start, but as an organisation, we had limited funds to be able to deliver. That's why it was so important that the department then came very close after us to open up, and through Barnett related funds, I'm sure you know there was about 1.5 billion UK wide, which had been identified by DCMS for COVID related support to go into culture, arts and heritage. And through the Barnett formula, we were able to, and through the executive, we were able to get a certain sum of money that came through the Department for Communities. That was absolutely vital. I have no doubt whatsoever. It kept organisations alive, and it gave a lot of organisations confidence that they could continue. It's been a terribly sort of difficult time for so many, and the money that we were able to deploy and ensured that jobs were kept, and that organisations were able to plan for the future. And in relation to the skills, particularly the skills fund, which it's a program which is open. It closes next week. There's an initial sum of about £2 million which have been allocated to that. That is something that could be supplemented depending on a few other factors. We believe very strongly that we've already had two workshops for the sector, and over 100 different people have been involved on those workshops in the last 2 weeks. One of which was yesterday. There's, I think there will be more demand that we can satisfy, but in many ways that's fine. That is a good thing, because we will be able to fund the best proposals from organisations who see the skills fund as being a real opportunity to create roles within their organisations that will last for the next 3 years and help them move into a very different world. And that's one of the key things. I mean, I sat in the Culture, Arts and Heritage Task Force, and we're planning for a new world, a world that wasn't the same that we lived in before. And that's what this type of funding can really help deliver.
No, thank you for that, Paul. It certainly sounds quite exciting, actually. And I think all of us have had to readjust our ways of doing things and our ways of working. So it would be good to, as that rolls out, certainly to hear more about that in the future, in the next mandate. I just wanted to then ask you something. Excuse me. You'd highlighted in your paper also about the solution to reducing carbon emissions, and I happened to take part or chair a seminar on Monday to do with housing, actually, and very much saying the same things as yourself. Through sustainable reuse instead of demolish and rebuild. Just if you'd be grateful if you could just explain a wee bit more the thinking around that from your perspective.
Well, I think, as an organisation that gives out money, we're in the position to say to people, if they want our money, that there are various things that they need to do. So whenever it comes to funding new projects, we would want them to build ideas like this into their plans and their proposals. And while at this moment in time it would not be a factor that would lead necessarily to us funding or not funding them, we are in a position to encourage organisations to show that their projects can deliver in much more carbon friendly, carbon neutral ways. So it's very much that encouragement. And it could well be that as we develop our strategic plans going forward, that it becomes something that we have to ensure that every project has all aspects of this totally built in. But at this point in time, it's something that we encourage people to do.
No, and that is certainly good to hear. And I do understand certainly that reusing some of our wonderful buildings certainly it does reduce carbon emissions, as to just building new and building. I mean, very much everybody at the moment is looking at buildings in general, that they're sustainable and they're of high quality, and that even when it comes to heating and all of those other things. But
can I add another point, if you don't mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
To that. And that is the thing about our buildings, is our buildings tell a story about ourselves, who we are, who we were in the past. And I mean, that's why, I think particularly whenever planning comes into play, we should be looking at reusing our buildings in our city and townscapes and in our villages, because they're what make us authentic and unique. It's Belfast, is a city full of tremendous character. It's a Victorian city. The city of Derry, you look at the amazing streetscapes in the walled city. The more we can retain of that authenticity, the more we've actually got a place that marks us out as being very different to other places around the world, and helps us to build our tourism economy. But it also links into us as people. Heritage is all about identity, and there's lots of discussions about identity, of course, going on now in terms of how we can protect the identities that we have. But it also comes through our built heritage. It comes through our intangible heritage, and that's all around us. And that's what organisations like ourselves really want to show, is that people can use these wonderful kind of assets in very, very positive ways. It helps in terms of well-being. It helps in terms of our understanding of who we are. And that's what makes me very proud to be doing the type of work that I'm doing now, and my team's doing now.
No, I agree. I certainly know that any time I go and visit anywhere in the world whether it's a city break or whatever it might be, or holiday, and you look around you and you marvel at some of the most wonderful buildings around the world, and we forget actually on our own doorstep we have some very unique and some very marvellous buildings here as well. And I think you're absolutely right, we need to cherish that and treasure that. And hope that that we wanted them all to be there in another 100 years' time, for our own children and grandchildren to enjoy. So no, I would be 100% support of that. Members, I have a couple of members wanting to come in. Can members just notify me on Starleaf if they putting their hands up? I have Kelly, and then I have Mark. I'll bring Kelly in first.
Hi Paul, nice to see you again. Apologies for me coming in slightly late just after you had started today. I wanted to go back to the Skills Fund. It's something that I'm particularly interested in. In the Strangford constituency, I think the National Trust has probably kept more stonemasons in work repairing their stone walls after people crash into them than anywhere else. But I'm just wondering the extent of that Skills Fund, as we just talked about there. If we repurposed old buildings, very special, old buildings that need protected, does that Skills Fund extend to sort of the academic work or the academic understanding that is needed to repurpose old buildings, or is it purely the Skills Fund is for that tactile stone masonry, blacksmithy? Is it that? How can the Skills Fund be used to help, say for instance, builders or architects understand how to work and protect old buildings?
Well, I think that kind of academic work, or that understanding is work that's ongoing outside of the Skills Fund. Anyway, our universities are looking at all of different aspects of this. The Skills Fund has an immediate purpose, and that is to support organisations to come out of this particular crisis that they are in at the moment. I think while an organisation could potentially apply for a post that might relate to what you're referring to there, I think they're probably more likely to look at things like potentially digital skills that may have been missing in an organisation or whatever. But those more traditional skills are something that we are always interested in looking at, and we're always interested in supporting organisations to try and ensure that we have those skills retained in Northern Ireland. A number of years ago, we had a scheme with the Construction Industry Training Board, I think it's called, and which actually created jobs for ironworkers, for a number of those specialist skills themselves. So we would see that very much as part of our ongoing and everyday work. What I didn't say a little bit earlier is that our schemes are now open again. Our day-to-day schemes are open again. We're not just dealing with COVID relief stuff. So, we'll always encourage organisations to look at interesting projects that can really ensure that there's that capacity and capability to do the types of things that you've described.
Okay, thank you very much. Heartening to hear. The other thing then I wanted to ask you about, it's sort of tied into this, and I think we've spoke about it before. I know that we're all very aware of climate change, and we certainly have bills going through the Assembly at the moment. Will there be any, or have you any plans in the future for support, not just to protect buildings, but the skill set, to improve people's understanding, for instance, of the environmental protections for buildings, given the fact that there is a prevalence, well, there always is a prevalence of mould and damp coming into buildings, and particularly along coastal areas. I'm just wondering, is there anything that you guys are thinking about planning for the future to develop that skill set?
I think we're about to start to work on a new strategic plan, which will have to look at the whole sort of climate change aspects of the challenge that we have at the moment. And, we will have to think imaginatively about that, and we will have to think very, very thoughtfully about that. But these are all the issues that whenever anybody comes to us to fund a building or fund a project, we do encourage them to build into their thinking. So that's why it's so important, particularly when it comes to buildings, that organisations work with good conservation architects. They work with the department as well in terms of sort of listed buildings. But also we have a scheme which we will be developing and launching UK-wide in about a year's time, and that's our Heritage Horizon Awards. And it will be focusing on really imaginative solutions to some of the greatest challenges that we do face within heritage. And that, as I say, will probably be launched in about a year's time, and it'll be a significant amount of funding UK-wide.
That's fantastic. I knew you guys were good, but you're forward thinking too. One of the things the last thing I wanted to ask you about. Okay, we have a number of heritage items, not necessarily buildings, not necessarily big mansion buildings, but buildings that are across Northern Ireland that are in private ownership, that may be falling into disrepair purely for the cost that it would be. And there's one in particular in my area, Kirkcudbright Quay. Is there any support available through, the National Lottery Heritage Fund for communities to take legal action to protect these historic buildings or to buy these buildings from the owners? Because there is massive concern that just for the sheer amount of money it is to bring these items back into appropriate sort of state of use, or just even to be saved, that communities are feeling quite isolated, that they don't have the wherewithal to protect. Is there any thoughts on that going forward?
Probably one of the things I should have said earlier on is that we're able to do a lot, but it's unlimited money. Our budget in the context of Northern Ireland per year is roughly 5.5 million, and we're able to supplement that through a sort of a countries fund, which might bring us an extra sort of 2 to 5 million in for particular projects, but it is quite limited. So, there is only so much that we can do. Having said that, we are able to work with communities on the ground and help them support if there are assets that are really, really important to them, and they can show how unique and how valuable they are. We are prepared to have conversations with them and to support them in whatever way we can. But we would love to have a lot more money than we do. And I would also say, I mean, we're trying to work strategically. We work closely with the Department of Communities. We work closely with the Tourist Board. We've between us and the Department of Economy as well. Between us, we have set up a kind of a strategic leadership group to look at, I suppose, how the power and the value of heritage can be manifested in the widest possible way. And I would say that hopefully there will be good thoughts and ideas that will, the department will be looking at a new culture, arts and heritage strategy. And we'll be wanting to work very, very closely and help, I suppose, ensure that our limited funding can do the best that it can, but that also ideas and thoughts can be worked in from right across the executive departments that have an interest in this area.
Do you think then, I absolutely get that, because we could ask you to fund everything and that's not possible because there only is a certain amount of money there. Do you think then it would be for the department to bring forward legislation to maybe encourage, I'll use the word encourage, absentee owners to protect those heritage items that they own?
Absolutely. I think that's an absolute no-brainer. What is terrible to see is that buildings that are just sitting there in disrepair because a private owner doesn't have the resources or doesn't necessarily have the will until financial conditions make it easy for them to dispose or do something with those objects. There are some very good people in this sector who are very much across sort of this type of work. The likes of Belfast Buildings Trust, Ulster Architectural Heritage. So I think there is a responsibility for all of us, and that's again probably a point that's worth making. Through the department and through the leadership of Vane Greenway, we sit on a heritage stakeholders group where organisations from the various buildings trusts and the many other sort of actors in the field of heritage engage. And we try to think strategically about what the sector needs. We've been talking to all the parties and trying to help encourage the manifestos to reflect some of the priorities that we collectively see. So, in speaking to me, I suppose you're seeing a representative of the heritage sector as well, and this partnership and strategic working is fundamental to everything that we do. And one final sort of point I would probably make on that is that every project that we fund, we do want to see, it's back to your climate change point, we want to see some form of positive environmental effect. So, by working in an outcomes related way, and we bring that all through our assessment, and working in an outcomes related way, we try to achieve as much as we can from the resources that we have.
Thank you very much, Paul, and appreciate all the work that you guys are doing and the funding that has helped to protect and maintain our historic buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Can we bring in Mark, please?
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Paul. Thank you for your presentation this morning and your passion, I suppose your continuing passion when it comes to protecting and promoting our built heritage. Just following on from your answer to Kelly's question there, and it's regarding the work that you're doing alongside the department and other organisations with an interest and expertise in built heritage, looking at those strategic sort of needs. Is there any scope, I suppose, or has it been considered or explored that whenever we look at buildings that Kelly had mentioned an example there, but across the north we have some buildings of huge historical and heritage value that are falling into disrepair. They're in private ownership, and for various reasons, the owners are either unable or, as you said, in some instances, unwilling to invest in restoring them at the moment. Is there any sort of work being done on prioritisation centrally between yourselves and the department in terms of the value of buildings? And I know that's very hard to do, but as in how you would prioritise interventions, or where you would prioritise interventions?
I would first off say, just by way of, and I'll answer your question in a second. We're about more than just built heritage. We're about sort of heritage in all of its manifestations. But the built heritage element is the one that I suppose comes most foremost to many people's minds, particularly whenever they see sort of dereliction, and whenever we go through our city and townscapes and whatever. Obviously there is a register of buildings at risk, which the department has, and it probably is one way of prioritising what is important. But again, it's back to where you spend your money and budgets. If you look at the Grand Opera House, it wasn't in disrepair, but that project alone took £5 million worth of our money to help restore it, and one building alone could deplete all of our budgets. So we try to spread it as broadly as we can, and that's why it's about working strategically, and it's working with the likes of the various buildings trusts that there are throughout Northern Ireland, to encourage them to make good cases for buildings that they can take control over, buildings that potentially can have wider community uses. And there's plenty of examples throughout our villages and towns and of that. And the department is working with DERA, and while we're not formally associated, we have funded a couple of these projects on the Village Catalyst programme. So what that endeavours to do is to bring some of these buildings back into use. We will never be able to sort of deal with the deficit of many that you see in many private buildings that are out there, but we try as best as we can strategically to try and find and work with some of the solutions that become available.
Okay, thank you, Paul. You'd spoken there a wee bit about your role in the delivery of one of the COVID support schemes around heritage, and I know it was news for a day, but I'm going to bring it up again. I was just wondering, in terms of your role in that, was that just in delivery, or were you responsible at the design end as well?
Well, delivery, clearly the department sets the core objectives, but there was a good discussion between the department and ourselves about what was possible. But ultimately, the department, it is very much the department saying that these are our particular priorities. But the good thing was they did listen to us on various issues. So, there is a good, we take ownership as well. And one of the things that we are working towards, and perhaps this is something that the department will be able to give you greater clarity on, is that we will be given policy directions at some stage in the near future. They are being consulted on whatever. So we're not we don't see ourselves as a free agent and utterly independent of the context in which we find ourselves in. We do want to have a degree of independence, but we want to engage and work with the likes of the department and other departments in Northern Ireland and local councils as well, to ensure that whatever we're working on will be delivered to the best of our capabilities and to the best of the needs of society here.
Yeah, and I know early on too, you had mentioned the role of your organisation in the restoration of Brook Park. And it's a bit mad actually, because I got an email from someone about Brook Park yesterday complaining that there's not enough car parking and that there hadn't been enough consultation at the time of the restoration. Now, personally, I don't know about you, but there aren't many projects that I've been involved in that are around the ages of that there's been as much consultation on. But I remember at the time, and I don't know if you'd be across the detail because you're involved in that many things, Paul, but there was a sort of standoff between a multi-use games area and a car park. And like, I was pushing for the play area at the time, so if I got that wrong, hands up. But it was just one in terms of, I think it was 4.5 million or maybe even more that HLF put into that scheme. If council were to revisit it now and look at putting in additional car parking spaces, or how long after getting funding from yourselves do they have to abide by your wishes, in terms of the design of the whole park?
Well, I mean, we are in contract with the council for that project and will be for, I think that it's a period of total 20 years. So we don't walk away from the projects that we put money into. And actually it's 25 years, I think, in this case. And that, that's part of us ensuring that the objectives that were originally identified will continue to be met. However, the reality is, we're also realistic about how the world changes. So we're open to engage with people, but just because somebody wants more car parking doesn't necessarily mean that that's the solution either. I think everything has got to be looked at on an individual basis, and that's hopefully the type of thing that the council would talk to the likes of whatever is the authorities that are responsible for ensuring that the park is protected, and work out what the right needs are.
Yeah, and then you said, I think it was Derry Strabane Council that you says you're working with on the cemetery as well. No, I'd be very interested in maybe catching up with you at a later stage to hear a bit more about that. But what I would underline is, and I'll be saying it to the council as well, is the importance to involve the community in anything there. Now, there's been a wee group running, I don't know if you've met them, is it History and Headstones or something? And for years, they've been trying to push the, I suppose, potential of the city cemetery. And by and large, it had been falling on deaf ears in the council. So I'm very glad to hear that they're now waking up to the potential that exists there. But I would hate to think that this other very small organisation, largely volunteers, will be pushed aside as they move forward with it.
I mean, you're right. I mean, communities are when we put money into projects, communities have to be involved. And somebody approaches us. I mean, a good example would be the baths, Templemore Baths in Belfast, where there was a community group that was heavily involved in it, and they tried to get a project in Templemore Baths going for a long time, but they themselves were never going to have, I suppose, the economic or political heft to make it happen. It took the council to get involved. One of the things we endeavoured to make sure of was that the council didn't push that group aside, and that they involved them as much as they could. So any project that we get involved in, we always see it as fundamental. And back to I mean, Brook Park was for the users of Brook Park. And if I was, if there are needs, I think it's about going and asking the users of Brook Park really what are the current and contemporary needs. you may get some people who want to want more car parking for this, that, and the other, but you might find the actual users don't. So, I don't have the answer to that question, and it can be different in every circumstance. But listening to communities is, it's what it's all about. The last thing people want is things to be done upon them. And those groups, the volunteer groups who are out there involved in all aspects of heritage, do phenomenal work. The Railway Preservation Society in Whitehead, for example, they're all volunteers, and they keep old rolling stock on the public railways. The work they do is absolutely phenomenal throughout Northern Ireland. Volunteers are the lifeblood of heritage, and we'll do everything in our power to support groups like that.
No, glad to hear that. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Mark, if we could bring in Paul Free, please.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, thanks very much. It's been fascinating. I'm besotted by history. Some of my colleagues would tell me that when they look at my Twitter feeds and stuff. So, but it's the quirky side of history that I think catches people. And I love architecture too. So whenever I go away, like the Chair, I'm taking photographs of buildings, and my wife's looking at me as if I'm weird. So I suppose the question is, how do we connect history to our community better? And it strikes me that we do miss a trick with regards to our school children and the younger generation. So I suppose, what real physical, tangible connections do you have with principals that you can assist in the curriculum? I used to hate history at school. You were told to learn a certain subject or a certain period, and I just wanted to learn history, what interested me. So it strikes me that a local history will always entice young people if you can connect them to it. And then when they grow, they take pride in it. So can you point me to where you have a tangible existence in our classrooms and a connection to our children that you educate and teach and really promote the importance and significance of local history?
Absolutely. I mean, the type what you're talking about there are the types of things that are built into nearly all the projects that we get involved in, of a certain size. Clearly, some projects are quite small and can only do so much. But a lot of our landscape partnership schemes, for example, which we've funded well over 10 landscape partnership schemes throughout Northern Ireland, and that links built, natural and cultural heritage all together. Many of those schemes would have had educational schemes right at their heart. So that's absolutely critical, and you're totally right. It's that local, bringing it down to the local. One of the great things about the work that we've done over the decade of centenaries, what am I talking about? Not the work we've done, the work that others have done. The likes of Eamon Phoenix, for example. Eamon's great skill is that he can make any place in Northern Ireland seem utterly exciting because of what had gone on there in the past. And similarly, there's I mentioned earlier, there's a project down in Arnie in Fermanagh, and that particular project, Arnie came to fame about 30-40 years ago because a professor of folklore in America focused on it, Henry Glassy, and he's written 5 books on Arnie. And he's one of the most eminent folklorists in the world. And in 2014, I went down to listen to him talk in Fermanagh, and he came out with this line which I'll never forget. He was asked by, I think it was the radio priest Brian Darcy asked him this question. This was in the hall, and he says, "What makes Arnie so special? You've written 5 books. What makes Arnie so special?" He says, "I could have gone to anywhere in Northern Ireland, and it would have been, I would have found it's equally an interesting things. And I wasn't trying to say that, Arnie wasn't special. It's all special.
Yeah.
And, what you're touching on is, when people think of history, sometimes people think, oh, it sounds very dry. It's all about the past. But it's about ourselves. It's about our families. It's about memory, this embedded memory that we have that goes back through our generations, that connects us to, our forefathers. That is so, so, so important. Great example of that is the workhouse in Enniskillen, which is a current project that's being delivered. It started in famine times as a workhouse, and that's how the people in Enniskillen then knew it as. It then became linked into the Erne Hospital, and it was delivering for the community in a totally different way. In its latest manifestation, and it's the same building we're talking about, it's linked into the new educational college. So there you have, social care, health, and education, all surrounding this building, and this building being part of all of that. So we need to retain. These are the memories of these memories of our buildings, of landscapes, and our places. Infuse young people, infuse old. That's why, I keep going on. I mean, heritage is all about identity. It's all about who we are. And when I talk about identity, I'm not talking about my identity as a nationalist or a unionist or whatever. I'm talking about my identity as a person of this place. And, placemaking is a concept that people talk more about now, and we need to think heritage is a vital part in all of that. If we're developing our villages, our towns, our cities, we've got to really think in heritage terms, I believe, because otherwise we lose the connections to the past that actually make the spaces that we have around us so rich and powerful.
It strikes me that you talk a lot about the digital age and trying to use that to enhance historical learning and understanding. Strikes me that in our schools we really should be developing technical and computer skills along with recording elderly folk and their stories for record keeping and posterity, because we won't have those people around forever. And it would be really important for young people to actually interview them, and also to interview people talking about buildings. Is there anything like that in your remit?
I mean, these are all projects. It's about, good projects. Good projects will do this. They will be imaginative. Sometimes people don't like working with us initially because we push them to think better about the project. What's the digital connection? Are you engaging with younger people? Education is an outcome that's very, very important to and we ask people to look at that in literally all of our projects as such. So it's about them being imaginative in terms of how they engage with things. I remember one Traveller's project we funded might be a decade ago now, and part of that project was the young travellers going to their grandparents and recording them and asking them, what was their lives like? Making that connection between the young and old, giving them a reason to talk to each other in a way where they're listening to the words of experience and understanding that someone, who's maybe 60 years older than them has. That's the way to do things.
Can I ask then, if you had the means and you had the berries, what would you enhance with regards to your current practice, or would you do something completely different with your additional money and berries?
Well, I think, we've funded a couple of projects. We did sort of a test scheme, if you could put it that way, called Great Places a few years ago. All the different sort of heritage assets and groups and people. And one of them, there was about four of them we funded. One of them was the Great Place in North Belfast. That linked the Orange Hall through to Clifton Street, through to the university, through to the New Lodge, through to 174 Trust, a whole range of different, through to the Indian Community Centre, and connecting all of these different groups, and got them to sit around the table to actually think, what connects us? How can we work together? How can we, create this place for the future? And and one of the funny things, Clifton House keep inviting me to meetings with the Minister for Infrastructure, because one of the outcomes of that project is actually recognising there are some transport blocks at certain spots. And on what level you think, what has that got to do with heritage? It's got everything to do. It's about access. It's about people. It's about not cutting things off. I don't want this to be too Belfast sort of folks, but like the West Link cut off, so much of Belfast from each other. You go to Carrickfergus and you look at Carrickfergus Castle and you see a road kind of running through, cutting off, the two elements, the town and the castle. So we've got to think holistically, and I think. That's why heritage isn't independent of everything else that goes on around us. But, I would like to see, I suppose, in terms of community planning, greater appreciation of the importance and value of heritage in all of its forms. And that built into hard baked into the process for looking at what should be happening, within communities, and in terms of the development of plans for whatever needs to will go on from there.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Could we bring in Ciara, please?
Thank you, Paul. And just following on from Paul, just two wee things, obviously, within the City of Culture, really brought to the fore back in 2013 for communities. I worked in the community in my previous job. It brought alive looking at the whole heritage in their own neighbourhoods and communities. And I know there's a range of projects in the city, even in the outer north there of the city that I was involved in, the likes of the Forge Writers Group, Boom Hall Trust, the refurbishment of Victoria Hall. So a momentum has really built with local residents and neighbourhoods. You mentioned, I suppose, what's key for me around community planning. I'm just interested to hear, and I 100% agree, we need to look at community planning in a broader sense and how we connect that more so to the rich heritage that we have. So with regards to the strategic leadership group and the heritage stakeholder group, what involvement there with our local councils in the area, what level of engagement is within those groups and moving forward with regards to protecting our rich heritage? Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to be strategic, you need to have all the right parties round the table. And in terms of there's a kind of the heritage group. I've got to be clear in my head. I'm not mixing two different sort of groups up here, but we have invited local government to engage with that. I'm trying to remember, was there supposed to be somebody from local government in the last meeting? Pardon me. I'll need to double check and get back to you on that one. But you can't do. The point you're making is you can't have all sort of government departments all talking to each other and with the likes of ourselves and not include local councils. The way that things work have to work is a combination of all of these different bodies working together. So I mean that's absolutely vital, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ciara. No other members have indicated that they want to ask anything further. So can I then just thank you, Paul? Very informative, really good briefing this morning, and good to have you with us. So thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, members, we're running just slightly ahead of time. So if we could just take a 5-minute break at this stage, and then we'll be right back.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound.
Okay, members, we're now going to move on to agenda item 7, which is a briefing by the Historic Environment Division. Members, you'll find a copy of their briefing paper in your table papers. And then can I welcome Ian Greenway, Brona Ramsden and Manus Deary. You're all very welcome this morning. Good to have you with us. Can I ask then, Ian, if you would like to begin your briefing? Can you hear us? No, I can't hear. Hold on. Just
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me now?
I can, Ian. Yes, go ahead.
Good. Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, members. Thank you for the invitation to brief you this morning on the work of Historic Environment Division. I'm Ian Greenway, Director of HED. I'm accompanied today by Brona Ramsden, the Deputy Director, and Manus Deary, one of the Principal Architects and an Assistant Director of the Division. I know for the briefing request that you have some specific issues you want to pick up, but if I may, I'll start with some more general remarks to draw out elements of the written briefing we've provided. We've listened to the evidence session for National Lottery Heritage Fund, with whom we have always worked closely as a key element of the historic environment sector and a vital funding body for heritage. That collaboration has deepened further in the last 2 years as the Heritage Fund team has at short notice stood up a variety of COVID funds and delivered them with professionalism and at pace The department is very grateful indeed to them. Returning to the work of HED, the division is charged with delivering a wide range of statutory duties connected to the historic environment. The bulk of these being contained in the Historic Monuments and Archaeological Objects Order 1995 and the Planning Act 2011. These include our role as a statutory consultee to planning authorities, regulation of works to schedule monuments and of excavations, conserving and providing access to 186 state care monuments, and maintaining a list of buildings and a schedule of monuments. These are all matters that society has deemed sufficiently important to enshrine as duties in legislation. Why is that? Part of the answer is that they are included in international treaties and conventions to which we are signatories. But to me, more important is that the historic environment delivers tremendous benefit to us and to our society. The sector created a document, Heritage Delivers, in 2018, which sets out the importance of the historic environment, our historic environment, to tourism, to regeneration, to health and well-being, to placemaking, to investment, to social cohesion. The document drew out how treasuring our past enriches the future, and how our historic environment supports our prosperity, strengthens our society, and shapes our character. That might seem lofty prose, and indeed it is, but we can each, and I heard many committee members doing so in the briefing with Paul, point to examples of authentic places with heritage assets at their core, to the local heritage which we have re-engaged with during the pandemic restrictions, to places that we hold dear. HED's role is to champion all of that and to implement the legislation and provide the support and advice which underpins it. That means designating buildings and monuments that are worthy of special protection, providing specialist advice to planning authorities about appropriate ways in which to enable development while respecting those special assets, ensuring works to monuments and on excavations are properly regulated with respect to the heritage assets, and enforcing where this is not the case, taking proper care of the fabric of the monuments entrusted to our care, and providing access, both physical and with suitable information to them. As with all parts of government, we face challenges of this. One of these is, of course, funding. There is never enough to do all that we want to do to deliver on all of the potential. The division saw particularly challenging cuts in 2014 and 2015 as a result of the DOE financial position and the exit through the voluntary scheme of 20% of its staff. Another key challenge is that many people see heritage as an impediment rather than as an asset. Our written briefing includes a number of figures, for instance, of the precipitous decline in thatched buildings once seen everywhere and now almost disappeared, and of the reduction in the number of pre-1919 homes during the century, losing the character and authenticity they bring, and the climate emission benefits of reusing what we have already constructed. There is a view that listing a building is a death sentence for it. Yet there are countless examples of where listed buildings have been adapted and repurposed. We need together to work to provide facts and examples to counter these erroneous perceptions. The division seeks to deploy our finite and limited resources to help communities to understand and realise the benefits of our historic environment. We seek to do this objectively, professionally and constructively, and we would be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, and we're delighted to have you here with us today. And we do understand absolutely the important work that your division has and has to do. And I suppose I want to probably start with at the end of your comments there, and you commented there about how some see an impediment to economic well-being. And it's probably following on a wee bit from what Paul had said in the earlier briefing with the lottery fund. Is there a need for wider education, do you think, that we need to be doing more there, and communication on the impacts of the work of the division? Sometimes I think it's certainly when you get to my age, you see the world around you very differently, and you want to see things preserved. You know, history really does interest you, and I suppose Paul had said that earlier too. It didn't interest him when he was at school, but it does now. So what sort of work is there anything wider that we need to be pushing for that understanding with people?
Thank you, Chair. And I think some of it comes back to we could do everything, we can only do a certain amount of things. Elements of our heritage are included in the syllabus in schools. That's going to be a key part here. A number of schools visit various castles. Many come to Carrickfergus Castle in our care, for instance. But our perceptions change, you're right, as we grow older. But COVID has done that profoundly as well. The numbers of people coming to our outdoor monuments has increased very significantly. That's been great. Some of the stuff they've left behind and some of the odd acts they've attempted to do on the sites perhaps hasn't always been so great. But how do we capture that and bottle that? And Heritage Fund ran a small part of the COVID funds was around your local heritage and working with your local heritage, so that people did connect more. In the south, they talked about 5K heritage because at one point there was a restriction of 5 kilometres distance from your home during one of the lockdown periods. We do as much as we can. We work with departments, we work with schools. We could always do more. How we find the capacity to do that and how we would prioritise that alongside our other duties is a real challenge.
Then following on to that, in challenges as well, it's around the budget. And you know how much we love to talk about the budget here in this committee and how there's not enough for every part of the Department for Communities. So it's just around those challenges around carrying out your functions, whether that's statutory or non-statutory functions. How is that impeding you?
Predominantly staff, money for staff, and we do appreciate that taking on a member of staff creates an ongoing commitment, putting that into the baseline. Some of it is at quite small numbers. We're a statutory consultative planning authorities, thousands of applications coming past us. We've estimated 2 or 3 more staff would allow us really to get on top of that rather than always scrabbling up the slope. And that's a key element. We're working with other departments, of course, with DFI and others. In the state care monuments, the figures are bigger. We're just finishing a state care investment programme business case, and that's suggesting the conservation backlog and monuments is around £30 million. That couldn't all be done at once in 1 year, of course, even if the money were available. But it gives a sense of how leaving things for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years looks okay, but that accumulates. Climate change comes in on top. Extra visitor numbers come in on top. How does any department find £30 million? That is a real challenge. We can make our case, and we do make our case, as do colleagues in other parts of the department. We do try then connect.
Sorry, go ahead.
Heritage and regeneration, heritage and housing, heritage and culture. We need to work on this together, not singularly.
Yeah, no, and I suppose when we look at the historic environment, there are many things within historic environment that can't be left. It can't be left for 2 or 3 years to run along. That they needs attention. It needs attention immediately or in the immediate future. So, no, certainly I think as a committee we will be looking at that, at the budget challenges that you have as well. I'm going to open up for members. I have Ciara and then I have Kelly. So if I can bring Ciara in, please.
Okay. 96. Sorry there, I had my video off. Just thank Ian, Brona and Manas first and foremost. Obviously your paper, your detailed paper really demonstrates the scale and the level of your statutory duties and the work that you have been involved in and engaged in. Just two quick questions for me. One would be in relation to maintaining the historic environment record. Obviously there's over 50,000 heritage assets that are recorded. So I'm quite interested, and obviously you use that to inform your decision making. So I'm quite interested just to find out, how's that done with yourselves and with the community to be able to, the ongoing maintain of it and update it. And then secondly, obviously heritage enabled regeneration to create authentic places. Obviously from working in the community sector, that's probably key, and working in local councils and cities and stuff. In relation to, I suppose, one of the key questions for me, in the decision to list a building, and obviously use of key criteria that use must adhere to for listing, particularly special architectural and of historical importance. I've worked with organisations and groups that are very keen to have a building protected and engage it in a whole regeneration in their community. And obviously, they would have applied to yourselves and referenced all the key criteria and how they adhere to it. So, how do we respond to those groups in relation to your decision-making process in relation to why a building should be listed or not listed? So just them two key questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. And I'll take the first one, and I'm going to pass the second one to Manus. I'll give him a little warning of that now around the list of the criteria. I'll make one general comment on that. The material that comes through my inbox, it's roughly equally balanced between people complaining we haven't listed a building and people complaining we have listed a building. So I'll just make that very general comment. On the historic environment record, that is an accumulation of material over many decades. It's stored in the Klondike building in the gasworks in Belfast. We have a team of curatorial staff who maintain that, who take material from a wide variety of sources to augment that. We are actively looking at how we move that record into the Prony building, for the benefit of both how it's stored, but also for greater public access to it, recognising there would be people looking at the Prony collections and our own collections. There is a wide variety of material. It's very little known. It's much less known than it could or should be. It's become seen as a sort of a specialist field, whereas I think, in picking up some of the comments of the chair, historic environment is much broader and much more fascinating, and a lot of graphic material as well as written material. Mm-hmm. So we have that team maintaining it. We know we need to make it more accessible, and I think the move to Prony, if we're able to achieve that, would be a big step in that. Okay. But I'll pass over to Manus around listing.
Okay, thank you. Yes, you can hear me okay, yeah? Yeah. Okay, well, the legislation with regard to listing sets out that we as a department have to consider buildings of special architectural and historic interest. So that's the test. It has to be of special interest. And we then publish criteria which interpret what we mean by architectural and historic interest. So they're all in the public domain, and you can see very clearly how we compare our consideration of buildings to this criteria. So if people disagree with the approach that we have taken, then they can write into us at any time, and we can reconsider that. We have two statutory consultees if we were proposing a listing. One is the District Council and the other is the Historic Buildings Council of Northern Ireland. So equally, I suppose if people are concerned, they could write through those routes as well as our statutory consultees to talk to us as well. But the fundamental really is that it has to be architectural and historic interest. We're not allowed to take anything else into account in arriving at that listing decision. So condition, for example, isn't a consideration if the building is still regarded of architectural and historic interest.
Manus, just in relation to the criteria then in your decision-making process, what information do you provide back? Do you clarify with, those that put the request in exactly how your decision-making process came to be? So they can
It depends, I suppose. Sometimes we get very detailed arguments put forward, and so therefore a very detailed argument probably merits a fairly detailed reply. Other times it's somebody's driving past and thinks that's a nice building, says, could that be listed, please? And so then it's probably a more formal. The department has looked at this and we don't think it meets the test. But I suppose the other thing is that listing is, it's about the special. Just because something isn't listed doesn't mean it isn't of architectural or historic interest. And sometimes we can find that to be the case, that people think, oh, well, it's not worth anything at all if it's not listed. That's not the case. It's, we have lots and lots of buildings that are of make the backbone of the places where we live. If they were lost, they would be a great loss to us collectively, but they may not meet the merit of the test. And sometimes it can be a very difficult and probably painful decision, but we have to try and be consistent across the decisions that we make across Northern Ireland, so that the merit of doing this is reasonable, because we are imposing fairly, we're imposing restrictions on people by listing buildings on them, and so we have to be fairly careful about that.
Okay. And just in relation to how many applications would you get even for listing, on a general basis, on an annual basis, many applications would you be dealing with where individuals or organisations or councils believe a building should be listed? And
well, I'm not directly in charge of the listing anymore, but I understand that around about 100 listing queries are received every year into the department. Now, our second survey has slowed down in recent years. We were trying to do assess a council area every year, and we've got about 3/4 of Northern Ireland covered. And at that stage, we were probably getting less queries coming in. So as we have dropped off and considering things holistically, there are more one-off inquiries coming in from the public. And it also obviously reflects concerns about pressures. So in the late 2000s, when there was lots of development going on, there were an awful lot of listing queries coming through at that time. And then as pressures have dropped off, that has been less of a concern, and things have kind of started to pick up again over recent years in terms of planning applications. And so it's fair that the listing queries have picked up as well.
okay, thank you, Manus. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. I might just add, around 1% of Northern Ireland's buildings are listed. There's around 9,000, and there's roughly a million buildings in Northern Ireland, just to give a feel of the proportions.
Okay, thank you, Ciara, thank you, Ian. I then have Kelly, then Paul Free, then Stephen Dunn. So Kelly first.
Thank you very much, Ian, and to your team. Ian, I noted in your paper that you provided to us, about the much reduced grant funding levels that you have for research, repair, regeneration, and you very clearly have highlighted to us today that this is having an impact on protecting our buildings moving forward, and you've talked about the 30 million. On that, can you confirm, has there been any consideration as yet within the department for this 3-year budget for any of that money to even start to roll out to improve upon that?
We, as you expect, Kelly, have been making our case, as have colleagues across government, as you would expect. What we have, we recognise we have much lower levels of funding than we had 10 years ago, when there was around about £4 million a year in listed building grants at its peak in 2012, 2013, that we now have managing a scheme of £200,000 this year with a £5,000 cap on individual schemes. That's where we are at. Statement of fact, I'm not making special pleadings there, but what we have done is try to connect in, both with National Lottery Heritage Fund, with philanthropic bodies, but also with our colleagues within the department. So Paul earlier was talking about Village Catalyst, where that's DERA funding from their rural development, it's housing executive funding, it's our funding, our expertise, architectural heritage funds expertise as well. On a much larger scale, Carrickfergus City Deal is a £46 million programme. Around £10 million of that will be going into the castle for refurbishment and enhancement of the castle. So we are, sometimes poverty can be the father of invention, or whatever the phrase is. We've had to look elsewhere. That can be positive. Let's look glass half full, I guess. But we are severely constrained on what we know we should be doing, not just what we could be doing.
And just to help on that, this is a question that you will have heard me asking Paul from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. When we're talking about that maintenance, that's of buildings and historic places that we know of, but there are a number of those buildings that are in private ownership. Just to be clear, is there any legislation that is in place that would force a private owner to upkeep a listed historic building? And if not, is this something that the department is considering bringing forward?
I'm going to pass that one to Manus because he heard you asking the questions earlier and he's ready with the answers to that one.
Brilliant.
I love his confidence. The straight answer is the legislation does not require an owner to maintain a listed building. The legislation gives the department and local councils powers to intervene if it appears that a listed building is getting to the stage where it may potentially be lost. And the powers available to the department are cited in the terms of compulsory acquisition. So if the response to a repair notice doesn't have the effect, then the department has the power to compulsory purchase. But the issue of maintenance is a difficult one, because how do you legislate for somebody to maintain a building? Do you, if for example, if you think of your own house, and every autumn the leaves from the trees land in your gutter, and we all, with the best will in the world, want to get a ladder out to clean the leaves away from our gutter, and we know that if we don't do that, then that might be build up of water and it might rot the ends of the joists inside of our roofs. But how often do we get on the ladder and go up and clean out those gutters? So should we, as a department, be setting fines on people to do that? So it's a difficult thing to legislate against. I know that one of the ways we looked at this about 10 years ago through the Heritage Crime Forum that was set up in 2011, and one of the things that came out of that was looking at the potential of a dilapidations bill, which was taken on by our colleagues in NIEA, who are now in DERA. And within that, there was this idea of different levels of dilapidations. So the similar sort of thing where a district council could go in to take direct action. The way the legislation is written at present, it says for the owner to take action or demolish, which had sometimes unfortunate results. So the idea is that you would have a three-tiered approach, or 3 or 4-tiered approach, where you could go in and take direct action. But if councils would have the powers to levy fines if buildings or land and spaces were felt to be particularly poor condition. So there's a judgment call allowed then. So that to us seems to be a fairly positive approach, and we know that that DERA have been working on that over recent years, and I think it's a matter of legislative time to bring that forward. But we think that that's possibly a positive approach that might address some of the issues that you're referring to.
It certainly would, but I'm just thinking as well then, if there was a situation where the owner couldn't afford and you guys were thinking about a compulsory purchase, I'm assuming then that that is very much limited because of the amount of money that may be involved, and that would cause a lot of difficulties then. So there must be areas or times when you sort of think, well, we could be doing with a compulsory purchase here, but we just don't have the capacity within the division to do so. Yeah, which is very similar.
I think it comes back to what Ian was referring to, and like I know there was a discussion with Paul as well about heritage at risk and how we deal with buildings like that. And it's about working with owners, it's about working with councils, it's about working across government, it's about bringing in the stakeholders and trying to find solutions and trying to find sustainable solutions. And sometimes coming to these things laterally can help as well. So an owner may not be able to do something, but an owner may be able to pass the ownership to a community trust that might be able to access grant funding that wouldn't be available to a private owner. We also need to think about sustainable futures, which is what we're doing with DERA and the Village Catalyst, not just fixing up buildings at risk in villages, but ensuring that they have a sustainable community use, which actually benefits the longer term of the building as well, because if a building has a sustainable use, it's much more likely to have maintenance put into it. So it's trying to look in that wider idea of working with owners to find solutions rather than to be punitive. If we have to be punitive, we probably, that probably should be the last resort.
That's very helpful. No, thank you very much, Manna Sandy. And on that, that's all the questions I have for you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. If we could bring Paul Free in, please, Paul.
Hello, thanks very much, Chair. I sat here very interested in Ciara's questions and the Deputy Chair's questions there. I suppose I have a history with you guys, Ian, particularly you. We met many occasions to try and resolve a local issue here in Northampton. And I suppose that's where it struck me at that time that you guys have a lot of power. Can you explain to the committee the varies that you guys have when it comes to the built heritage and what you can and cannot do? And that's a pretty wide question, I know, but it strikes me, having met with owners of buildings that are listed. I can remember being in a gentleman's house, a historic house that had been extended. And it was pretty stark between the old historic building, which was very, very cold. You could actually smell a bit of damp, although he would have tried his best to prevent that. When you went into his extension, it was completely different. The building in itself was chalk and cheese. And he was lamenting the fact that he couldn't do much with the historic building. He couldn't change the windows, upgrade the windows, and aspects like that. So I suppose, what varies do you have that you're able to control and prevent even an upgrading of a historic building? And also then, of course, your interaction with planning and how you have the powers, rightly or wrongly, to intercede and actually say, no, we don't like this, we don't like that design, when it comes to refurbishing historic buildings. Can you outline to the committee just the powers that you guys have?
Yes, and as you say, Paul, we have history, but we've moved on. What I would initially say is we have duties rather than powers. We have a duty to maintain a list of buildings of special historic or architectural interest. We have a duty to maintain a schedule of monuments. We have a duty to enforce where there is a breach of legislation. You can play that, of course, philosophically, whether that's a power or a duty, but from me sitting where I'm sitting, if an enforcement case comes to light, and unfortunately quite a few around monuments did during lockdown, we have a duty to proceed, subject to the prosecution service and the courts, of course, and many of these are offences strictly defined. So there are limited defences to them. We are very conscious of those duties. We are very conscious of those intrusions into what people may see as their own decisions around their assets and indeed around their lives, that the gentleman you mentioned and the cold house and so on. We attempt to work very closely and sympathetically. I think there's always a balance to be struck by somebody who's trying to do the right thing and somebody who is completely ignoring what the right thing is and heading off in a different direction. And there's always a judgment call about which is which. When I was in rates, we used to talk about the can't pay and the won't pay, and they are treated fundamentally different. It's similar here. We used to have a bit of a Faustian pact. We could list the building and thereby restrain some freedoms, but we had grant funding. So we were able to, if you could argue, take with one hand and give with the other. Unfortunately, now we still have that legal duty to list if it meets the tests that Manna's described. We have very, very limited money, and most other funders like Heritage Fund have very limited ability to provide grants to private owners. And Paul Mullen talked about that earlier. A lot of our intervention then is through the planning system, as you say, and that's now predominantly with the councils. We're a statutory consultee where heritage is engaged, and that there are mechanics around there for which consultations we see. We see around 4,000 a year. We reply to one every 15 to 20 minutes. That's a scale of the bulk operation that Brian McCurvey, one of the assistant directors, and his team are doing. We are very clear. We do not say, do we like that or not? We say, is that compliant with planning policy as defined at the moment through the planning policy statements and DOE and the legacy planning system, if you like, but fast, quickly moving towards local development plans, local development planning policies with each council. We're a statutory consultee to that process. We'll intervene if we feel a council is going too far from what we feel, and there will be that debate, and ultimately the independent examination of the plan will determine whether it's sound or not. But we may have managers as an architect. Brona and I are gifted amateurs, or amateurs anyway. We may have our view about what would look good in that particular setting, but we're very clear. We advise councils, who are the decision makers, about whether the proposal complies with policy. We seek to go beyond that and actually work with applicants to help them get something that is compliant but still meets their needs. The church hall where we engaged first, Paul, there were clearly needs for the congregation, and they were different from when that building had been built and how it was laid out. How can that work within taking those two things, the sustainable use, as Man has talked rightly about, and the heritage value of the building? Both can be debated and were debated in that case and are debated in many other cases. But we don't just say, we advise yes, we advise no. We try and work with, and there are many examples. The Ewart building in Bedford Street is a very recent example where the applicant wanted to remove most of the building. We pushed back on that. That building now has its original cast iron columns and so on in the building. And to my view, is a better outcome for the owner of that building than it would have been otherwise. Judgment again. That's what we seek to do. We seek to work, but we have this backstop. And sorry, just to finish, if any statutory consultee, HED or others, says that is not compliant with policy and the council decides to approve, the council is required to notify DFI, who decide whether to call in the application and make the determination themselves or not. And that's a DFI decision and a check and balance in the process.
So can I ask on that, if something gets called in and it's a DFI decision, who actually makes that decision? Is it a minister? Is it the permanent secretary? Is it the director? Or is it you with regards to the advice that you would give to that decision maker? And I suppose to add to that question, I call them powers, you call them duties, and I guess I know where you're coming from there, Ian. I really do, because we have to be responsible with our built heritage. But are those duties clearly defined? And is there any room for subjectiveness? Because ultimately, surely this is judgment calls in a lot of this. So does that not mean that your people, the people in your organisation, have incredible power depending on how they see something? And with that incredible power or duty, because it could be a burden in some cases, what redress or appeal mechanisms are there in place to object to that decision or judgment? Is it subjective like that, or how is it clearly defined? And if it is clearly defined, how do you ever put that across to every single different type of building that you guys have to assess? And that's why it strikes me that you guys then have incredible power with regards to the decision-making process. You know, I can go to a minister, and ministers have incredible power, but they're subject to legislation and policy. You guys will be subject to duty, but it strikes me that there'll be this judgment, this subjectiveness around all built forms.
Taking if an application is called in, taking some of the lower hanging fruit first, if I may. If an application is called in, DFI becomes the decision maker. They commence a fresh consideration of the case, the application, whilst of course drawing on the work that the council and the planning team there had done. We would be a statutory consultee to DFI in that case. They are the decision maker. My understanding, and I will caveat this, is that if it is of a regional significance, a minister makes the decision. And if it is not of regional significance, a planning officer in the DFI makes that decision. But I would have to defer to DFI on the particular nuances and process map, if you like, there. In terms of closest of definition, it perhaps comes back to the conversation Manus had with Kelly about what is maintaining a building and what is a suitable amount of maintaining a building. We can use terms in legislation. We can amplify them in regulation and in statutory rules. But there will still be judgment. There will be judgment by a police officer whether a crime has been committed and whether it is in the public interest to pursue by PPS, and the court will decide, and so on. We actively assist, and I think we've gained a good reputation with councils that we actively assist to try and find a way of making applications meet the user's wishes whilst complying with planning policy. Sometimes that isn't possible. If it involves demolishing a listed building, that becomes really difficult and the barriers become very high. But we seek to use that power sympathetically and lightly while still fulfilling our duty and recognising the planning authority, and depending on the scheme of delegation in the council, very often the planning committee of elected members are the decision maker, with appeals to the Planning Appeals Commission and judicial reviews and all those other checks and balances that exist throughout our system.
So can I ask, when you as a body make a decision, is that one person making that decision? Somebody who's been out on site and who is an expert with regards to the built form and the historical heritage? Or is that a group decision whereby there's one principal officer who's looked at the site, but then you all collectively make a decision? And if that is the case, is that transparent and open that people then can see those decision-making processes in play and can get, let's say, for instance, minutes of any meetings where decisions were taken? Because it strikes me that you have incredible power, but we need to make sure then there's the accountability.
Absolutely. With power comes responsibility. I'm fully with you on that. Where we are advising, so the planning, for instance, that will generally, straightforward cases will be dealt by with one of the staff, a conservation architect or a curatorial member of staff, with the normal line management supervision and advice where necessary. Where they're more complex cases, they will generally be taken to what we call a forum of staff, meeting of staff, if you like, and different views will be thrown around, and there will be a range of views you'd expect around the table on each application, and a range of suggestions. Well, maybe we could get the applicant to turn the building that way, or to reduce the amount of windows on that side, or to take it 5 meters further back. Then the conclusion, the consensus is written up and submitted to the planning authority through the planning portal. So everything that goes backwards and forwards in planning is all publicly available on the planning portal. Now, where we make
your submission to the planning process would be public, but your deliberations, they wouldn't be public though.
Any records from those they would not be made public as a standard thing, because just the recommendation, the consultation response is the key element. The law requires that to be a substantive response, not just a we agree or we disagree. The records of those discussions are FOI-able. They're not actively put in the public domain, but they are discoverable, quite rightly. Of course, as in any job, as in politics anywhere, there is much discussion, inevitably, that leads to a view, a consensus, a position emerging. If there isn't a written record of the full detail, that isn't available. But knowing these responsibilities we have, that those key points, particularly where we're making a decision, so are we going to list a building or not? That's our decision. We're not advising others. There would be a survey, there would be an architectural historian looking at the records around the history in particular. There would be an architect looking at the architectural work. There would be a detailed survey if it got to that point. There would be an evaluation forum, which would maintain records of how they determined it met or didn't meet particular criteria. HBC, Historic Buildings Council, will be consulted. Their meetings are minuted in quite some detail. The council would be consulted. They generally go to planning committees, so there would be a record of their deliberation and then a return. Then there is a further evaluation of all those comments, including from the owner of the building. We're not statutorily required to consult the owner or occupier, but we do, as a matter of course, and ask for their comment. And that's tested back against the criteria that Manus referenced, which are published criteria. And then a decision is made. There is a single decision maker ultimately, but there is a large amount of dialogue and engagement with relevant professionals and taking into account all the responses.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian.
Okay, thank you, Paul. If we could bring Stephen in, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks Ian, Manus and Brona for your very interesting presentation outlining your work and indeed some of the challenges. Particularly interested about the planning issue there in terms of consultee response time, as you know, is a very topical issue and one which is often brought up about the delays and so on, sometimes within departments. Just a question possibly for Ian. I know I've met Ian a number of times on local issues. If I can just highlight one local issue when I got the opportunity, it's regarding Grey Point Fort in Helens Bay, which Ian will be familiar with. There is an issue just at the minute around public access. You know, there's a real sort of feeling locally that it's underutilised, given the historic resource that it is. So I was just wanting to see, is there any update, Ian, on that? I was talking to a gentleman yesterday with a great knowledge of history and so on, you know, and there's a real feeling that they're keen to get some progress in terms of getting it open again and getting it utilised. So I'd be keen just to hear anything on that, please.
Ian, and I'm going to pass you in a moment. I'm going to pass you in a moment to Brona, who was actually there with council officers yesterday. Just as I pass through, I'll just mention on planning, Stephen, we try and work very, very closely with councils, and if they've got cases that are particularly urgent from their point of view, we will try and expedite consideration of those. We try and be an active collaborator. But I'll pass to Brona in terms of Grey Point Fort.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
That's great. As Ian says, I was actually out at the fort yesterday, coincidentally, meeting with the council to have discussions about how we consult best with local residents and local stakeholders on the future of access to the site. We have this year commissioned a conservation management plan, which is really setting out the significance of the site. And then I suppose the constraints and the way that it should be managed to protect and conserve the actual sort of physical built heritage going forward. And we want to get out and talk to those interested in the local area about that, and then about how we can move forward within that to open up access of the site as much as possible. We have, I suppose, we have boundless ambition, but we are grounded by budget, and it's a very, very special site. Its location alone is, on the coastal path there. It is really ripe for, for development and access, and it is actually a substantial site as well. So there is a lot that could be done on it. We want to talk to the community about their ideas and what they think that should look like. And obviously there will be constraints, and there will be, how do we get funding to carry out some of our ambitions? I'd like to assure you that it is sort of one of our priorities, and we're doing our best to look at how that can be done. This year we are just finishing the project on the searchlight emplacements along the coasts there. They have been completely, I suppose, restored. The emplacements, as well as sort of new interpretation signage along the fort, and I think that was 435,000 that's been spent on that project between ourselves and leader funding. That's obviously only a dip in the ocean, but it has made a big difference, and it was the first time yesterday that I'd seen the results of that work, and it does look very impressive. We've also reconstructed a bit of a First World War trench there, because it was apparently originally used for practice digging of trenches, etc. And that looks fantastic, and I can see it firing the imagination of many children. I'll certainly be bringing my own along. So I hope that helps, Stephen.
Great. No, that all sounds positive. Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Kira had her hand up to indicate she wanted to come in again.
Yeah, just a quick one there. Ian, in relation to Paul's questions, the process with regards to, I'm sorry, just to go back to this, I just want to have it clear in my head regarding listing. And that whether it's subjective, it's a duty, it's a power, and, you know, how them decisions are made. You mentioned a detailed process, for instance, surveys and historians and architects and stuff like that. When is that done? If someone puts in a request across the criteria for a listed building, does that be done for every case, or is there a decision made, right, we need to proceed and do a more detailed review of a case, or is there a time where one individual makes a decision? Just does every case for listing go through that detailed process? And then secondly, Brona, I would just be interested, and you would be well aware of the whole Boom Hall estate. And obviously the stables are listed within it, and obviously we have the Boom Hall house there. I would just be interested what engagement with the local council that you've had at this moment in time regarding the whole regeneration of the site. And you will be aware obviously of the recent household survey that was done by Boom Hall Trust, where 98.2% of the residents in the city would like to see particularly a Boom Hall house regenerated within the estate as well. So just two wee questions there, one for Ian and then just Brona maybe.
I think Broom Hall will end up with me as well. It's not one of the state sites. In case Brona was getting concerned there, Manus would love to take it as a dairyman, but I might keep that one to myself. What I suggest on the first question, Kira, is we have a detailed process map flowchart of the listing process. It may be better if the chair's content that we send that to the clerk, rather than me try and bastardize it, I suspect, in verbal form. But yes, as Manus said, there are stages and gates through the process, because doing a full survey is a significant effort. So that would need to pass a bar before you go into that space, and so on. But we will send the process map. On Boom Hall, very familiar with it. I visited the site with Manus and met members of the trust before lockdown, so 3 centuries ago, whenever that was, and conscious of the site. I keep in regular touch with Karen Phillips and the council, because we were talking about councils earlier. John Kelpie is actually the Solace chief exec's lead on heritage, so we'd have a particular link generically with Derry City and Strabane District Council, as well as, of course, on issues in their council area. I'm aware the trust has great passion and great expertise and wants to see that site further developed. We talked about Brook Hall earlier on, so one feels there's almost a spotlight being turned on that part of the Foyle embankment. But what can be done, how it can be funded, there are rival visions for the site, with the Eden project also having a view. The council is the owner. We are advisors and can be advisors to all of those. The trust has honed in on should the building be listed, the main house. The stable block is listed. We've tried to ask them, well, why are you so worried about that? What is the purpose? Whether that is listed or not, what difference does that make to your vision for the site and realising that vision? Rather than just having a sterile debate, if you like, of does it meet the criteria, because our view, the professional staff's view, is that it doesn't in its current state, because a lot of the material is gone. The trust passionately believe it does meet the criteria, so we can have that debate to and fro. I've actually asked, well, how does that, what we're all trying to do is make the best of that site, develop that site, regenerate that site. Listing is, to me, a sideshow to that question. And if we get distracted to that sideshow, we get distracted from the main question, which is, how do we get that site living, vibrant, authentic, and restored? So that in a sense, is where I've been trying to steer the trust a little bit.
Okay. But you are conscious then that the conservation plan that was done by council, they also recommended that the house should be listed. I suppose it's maybe we'll follow up Ian separately. I don't want to be hogging up this meeting, but maybe no. Thank you so much. Obviously for today and the information. I'm well more informed. Obviously, I look forward to seeing kind of the process map and the criteria and stuff. I'm sure we can follow up and have further conversations. But thank you very much.
Not at all. I will perhaps I'll sound like a broken record, but we have a duty to maintain a list and to use the statutory standards for that. So, as I say, I used that language with Paul through earlier, and I'm sure I'll use it again in some conversation. But the heritage of Derry is special. I'll say that, and I sound like Bruce Forsyth now, but it's really special. And how can we help in HED with our expertise, with our man on the ground, sitting in his bookline study in Dromahova? How can we help make the most of that?
That's great. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Ciara? Okay, no other member has indicated that they want to ask anything further of yourselves. So you mentioned there about sending through that process map to the committee clerk. That would be very welcome. And then that can be shared. Can I thank you, Ian and Bruna and Manus, for coming in front of us today? It certainly has been very informative, very worthwhile. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you. Okay, members, we are going to now skip over to agenda item 11 as we've got through other business earlier on. So agenda item 11 is our correspondence. Members, the correspondence memo you'll find at page 51 of your pack. I just want to draw your attention to pages 192, which is a letter from the Northern Ireland Football League in relation to the delivery of the sub-regional stadia programme for football. They've written to us again, extremely concerned around this. Members, are you content that we forward a copy to the Minister for a reply and to support the sentiments expressed in the letter?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you. Then I want to ask members, anything else under correspondence that any member of the committee wants to raise? Sorry, Andy, I'll bring you in first. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. If we can come back to the sub-regional stuff, can we seek to ascertain from the department, by way of briefing our written correspondence, where that currently is at? I know we've tried on multiple occasions, but as I understand it, the refresh and re-engagement piece has been finished for quite a number of months, and the Minister was to present recommendations on the way forward to her executive colleagues. We're in the dark as to whether that was done prior to the resignation of the FM. So if that has been done, can the scheme go forward? But if it hasn't been done, where will that leave the scheme being rolled out in this mandate?
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to just bring in Sean here if we can hear him, because he's no microphone.
So I'm just suggesting we get the minute to brief actually on this, because it's been not such an ongoing issue.
Yeah. John, I think you're right there. If members are agreed, we're going to ask them to come in and brief the committee, because this going back and forward letter writing is just it's wearying. You know, we are all weary around this entire issue and others. So would members be in agreement that we invite the department in to brief us on this?
Yes, please. Yep.
Yep. Okay. And meanwhile, we'll send that letter on also from NIFL. Through to the department. Members, anything else on the correspondence memo you want to highlight, or can we agree the correspondence memo? Agreed?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 12, forward work programme. Members, the team is still working on the forward work programme to the end of the mandate, based on our discussions that we had last week in closed session, and we're hoping that will be in next week's pack. Members, any comment or content to note then, forward work programme?
Agreed.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. I want to move on then to agenda item 13, which is any other business. Kelly, you had mentioned earlier you had a couple of things you wanted to raise, so go ahead.
Yes, please. I've recently written to the Minister asking the background to this is the Finance Minister did say in the Chamber that he was open to any ministers making application for funds for people who are still impacted by COVID. And we are all probably in this committee getting letters through from DJs who, while nightclubs were closed for a longer period, that their income levels have been shot to bits. I've written to the Minister to ask if she would make a bid, and she said no. And I would just appreciate if the committee would write to ask why, what's the policy that those DJs can't be helped, or those individual artists or the people behind We Make Events can be helped, given the fact that the Arts Council brought out a funding stream for organisations, but those individuals have been left behind. The last time that they got money was last September, or that's the time that it was opened. So there's that one, to see if that would be okay, if the committee would agree to write to the Minister just to say why not bid for money for these DJs.
Okay, well, we'll take that one first. Certainly I would be in agreement with that. We have received letters through our offices, I know, to do with the nightclubs, and albeit they're now open again, that will probably not proceed much further than that, but you do have an issue there, Kelly, around the likes of DJs. Are members in agreement? Paul and Mark both have their hands up. Is it on this issue, or?
Yes, it
Go
is.
ahead, Paul.
Chair.
Go ahead, Paul.
Well, certainly I agree with the letter with regards to financial support, but you know the best way to support these businesses is to let them carry on with their trade. It's the government that has put these businesses into this problem. And of course we had the certification scheme that was lauded up to save the closure of these businesses, but yet again, and yet within weeks, maybe even days, they were closed. So the government has used these businesses, especially nightclubs, because of course the nightclubs were used at times to coerce people into getting vaccinated, but yet they were the first people that were dropped whenever the government made decisions around closures. So I have utmost sympathy for these businesses. I don't think there's any justification for closing them down, opening them up, closing them down with restrictions, opening them up, and then we have to fund them and support them through government funds, which are taxpayers' money. It's just a perverse way of doing government. So, yeah, I certainly agree with the committee sending a letter asking for support. But we have to realise where this all originated from, and it was government policy, bad government policy. Leave it there, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Mark, is it on this subject? Mark, can you hear us? Your hand's up? No? Okay. I'm going to then move on. Kelly, you had a second issue you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, it was just on the housing executive leasehold situation. The last update we got was in October, and they said they had run into legal issues and they were hoping to get those resolved by December. If we could ask for an update on that, because it's still ongoing.
Okay, I know we do have Grania Long in with us next week, so if we can notify Grania that that is something we want her to address in next week's meeting. I know certainly our own party had a meeting with the housing executive. We've had several, but we had one back in November where they had told us exactly that, what you'd said. So I think absolutely we need to get that information, but hopefully Grania will be able to furnish us with that information next week. Thank you, Kelly. Any other members, any other business they want to highlight at this stage? Mark, your hand's still up. I don't know if you can hear us or not.
Mark says his camera's broken, so I'm messaging him to see if he has a question.
Okay.
His mic's not working, Chair.
Okay, so he's having problems. Sorry, Mark, we can't hear you. Andy, do you have your hand up?
Yes, Chair. It's just very quickly back to the Energy Payment Support Scheme, and I just noticed on the SR, and obviously while I had no issues with being made, it needs to be obviously delivered as quickly as possible. The department's proposing to make this payment at the end of March. It's just to see if there's any possibility of this being made sooner, because as we all know, many people out there really need this £200 immediately. Yeah, absolutely. And I hope generally by the end of March we've slightly milder weather. So I agree with you. That would be worth asking. Absolutely, Andy. I'm going to try Mark again and see if we can hear you. No?
Typed his question in.
Oh, has he? Sorry, I haven't seen that.
Okay. He's wondering about the notice to quit consultation report.
The notice to quit consultation report. Okay. We will ask those questions around that. Mark, look, thank you for bringing that forward to us, and sorry we couldn't hear you. No, we can ask those questions. Janice's making a note of that. All right, I don't think anybody else, I've hands up everywhere here, but yeah, Andy, you've still your hand up. Do you want to come back in again? No, it's away. All right, okay, members, I'm going to move on from AOB. if that's okay, and we're going to move then to agenda item 14, which is date, time and location for our next meeting. You'll all be very glad to hear that we're not meeting next Tuesday, so our next meeting will be next Thursday, the 17th of February at 10 a.m, or back to that time again. I think it's been such a long time since we've met at 10 a.m. So members, that will be in room 29, all being well. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next Thursday at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate